the Faster Than Light radio show.
Hi and welcome once again to the show. Thanks for joining us. This week, a look at two movies that really do have muscles, and I mean biological muscles. I'm talking about Conan the Destroyer, the second of the Conan movies, and The Terminator, both of which star Arnold Schwarzenegger, and my comments on those movies follow a little later in the program. I thought I must mention, following last week's show where I failed to mention the fact that The Last Starfighter, which I was beefing up and saying what a good movie it was, considering the hackneyed nature of the plot, etc., but quite enjoyable holiday entertainment, and a movie which I'm sure will be around for a long time. It's an enduring sort of story, and certainly well presented, is available in a novel form. And the novelising agent of this particular script was Alan Dean Foster, the man who brought us the first of the Star Wars trilogy books, the man who brought us Alien, and a number of others besides. In fact, there was a while there where it seemed like every novelisation around the place was going to be done by Alan Dean Foster. Well, he's done it again with The Last Starfighter, and true to his form, he doesn't follow strictly the film. There are differences. For instance, the way in which at the very end of the movie, the woman, the lady in question that Alex has come back to Earth to rescue his girlfriend, or not rescue really, but to take her back to the stars, the way in which she determines it really is Alex is somewhat different from the film. In the film, she gives him a kiss and it's all-knowing. Once she's finished that kiss, she knows it really is Alex. In the particular book, she just walks towards him, and when she gets close enough, she says, yes, it really is you. How she knows, I've got no idea. That wasn't a particularly good change, but there are others in the novel where slight changes of the way in which the film handled it and the way in which Alan Dean Foster presents it in the novel, which make the novel just that shade different from the movie. But of course you end up with Alan Dean Foster's quite adequate rundown of the script and quite adequate rundown of the scenery that you're looking at on the screen. A much more enjoyable novelisation than the one that I had great pleasure in telling you to avoid like the plague a few weeks back, which was the novelisation for, I can't remember the book now, that's how much it escaped my mind. But this novelisation of Alan Dean Foster's is a good one, much the same as Vonda McIntyre's novelisation of Star Trek III was a good one. I know the novelisation I was telling you to avoid, Larry Stein's for Ghostbusters. That wasn't a particular good effort in my estimation at all, a long way away from the movie. But both those, Vonda McIntyre's and Alan Dean Foster's, are worth having for your collection. Enough about novelisations. I'll get a chance to comment on that a little later in the program when we talk about The Terminator. There was a piece of paper that came my way from a wall at Murdoch. I have a habit of collecting bits of paper for the collection at Murdoch, and I pulled down one which, once the date had gone past, for a meeting of scientists against nuclear arms at UWA, evidently on December the 6th last year. SANA is the name of the organisation, and they had an annual general meeting on December the 6th, at which David Blair from the Department of Physics at UWA was the guest speaker, and he was talking about extraterrestrial intelligence, nuclear war and the arms race. Now that's the sort of subject that really I think deserves the listeners of this show knowing about. SETI, or the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, is based on the expectation that the conditions for life will exist in a large number of planetary systems in our galaxy. An electromagnetic telecommunicating civilization, an ETC, similar to our own, could be detected using radio telescopes. The number of detectable ETCs depends on several uncertain parameters, of which the dominant is the duration of the civilization. The only data available is for the present ETC on Earth. Here we observe an ETC which has developed an extreme destructive capacity in the form of nuclear weapons. Studies suggest that the present capacity is smaller than the major extinction catastrophes of the past 200 million years, but an extrapolation of the growth of nuclear arsenals suggests the possibility of human extinction in a future nuclear conflict. The finite possibility of accidental nuclear war alone leads to a high probability of a nuclear catastrophe in the next century. Such a catastrophe can be seen as an inevitable consequence of the aggressive instinct that led to human dominance of the ecosphere. It is possible that the correlation between an ETC and the potential for self-destruction, as observed on Earth, is a natural consequence of universal laws. In this case, SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, would appear a fruitless exercise, as the possibility of detection would be extremely small. On the other hand, a successful SETI would have great significance in that it would indicate a high probability that at least one civilization was capable of controlling its aggressive instincts. The logic of that paragraph simply floored me when I read it, and boy, I hope we get our act together so that we can possibly last long enough to at least hear some words from a SETI that doesn't share our aggressive instincts. I'll be back in just a moment.
Hi, I'm Eric Harding, and I'd like to implore you to come to SwanCon 10. It's happening Australia Day weekend, January the 25th to 29th, at the Airways Hotel, St George's Terrace. For this celebration of science fiction fandom, contact Post Office Box 318, Netherlands 6009, or see the Space Merchants.
Well, film themes. And of course that's a good introduction to the feast that is about to descend upon Perth, Western Australia with BFC's what's become annual, but it's the 6th Science Fiction and Fantasy Film Convention, seminar, whatever you like, out at Waits Hollis Lecture Theatre. It starts next Thursday, next Thursday on the 24th, and it's something that I really think I ought to preview this week, as already next week's show I've planned to talk about SwanCon 10, which is also coming up next week at the weekend on the Australia Day long weekend. So a look then at what there is in the first week of screening out at BFC, and I'm warning you with enough time to go and find some tickets. I'll give you the phone number that you can book tickets at, or at least get a program from if you've been unable to find one over the last month around the city. Well, first up is a double bill on the Thursday night, that's the 24th of January, at 8:15, which I would suggest you don't miss. If you've not seen either of these movies, then this is very good fare indeed. Hollis Theatre 1 has got showing Tron and Dragon Slayer as their opening shot, and for me, that is a very good double. Dragon Slayer, both Disney movies, Dragon Slayer very underrated, and I believe one of the better movies that was turned out and quickly forgotten for one reason or another. Brian Johnson, the man that I was praising a couple of weeks back for his work in Neverending Story, is responsible for a lot of the material in Dragon Slayer in terms of the models, and especially the dragon itself. And in fact, you can see some similarities. The dragon has some strange resemblance to Falkor, the luck dragon out of Neverending Story. But to me, that's a double not to be missed. Graphics out of Tron, model making and darn good storytelling in Dragon Slayer. Also, one of the features of this BFC programming is the amount of television they've been able to get hold of and screen. Most of this seems to be in the strand of programming at Hollis Theatre 1, and over the Australia Day long weekend on the Saturday, in the afternoon at 1 o'clock, you have a series of Twilight Zone episodes. It's the first of the Twilight Zone groupings. There is a second series later in the week, on Monday of the following week, but it's this first series on the 26th that caught my attention, because one of the episodes being screened is Eye of the Beholder. If this is not a Twilight Zone episode you've seen, then I suggest this is well worth taking a look at. Very well lit and very, very striking. To tell you what the story is about, there is a woman undergoing surgery to correct a defect so that she can fit in with her society, and if she unfortunately can't have the defect corrected, then she will have to go away to institutional life. And it's the way in which the story revolves. It seems to be very normal until almost the end. The Eye of the Beholder. It's a Twilight Zone episode not to be missed if you've not seen it as yet. Other material in the first week which has caught my attention is also the playing over the Australia Day long weekend on the Sunday, the 27th of January, and Monday, the 28th, of the total Star Wars trilogy, starting with Star Wars and going all the way through to the end of Return of the Jedi. Those triple-decker programs are tickets at the full price, I think, is around about the $6 level. So that's very good fare for looking at three major movies on a good screen with a decent sound system. I should say, actually, that the festival kicks off on January the 23rd in Hollis Theatre 2, not on the 24th in Hollis Theatre 1, and it starts with one of the first release movies that BFC have put together for this program. They credit it as a United States production. I believe, however, the company who put it together is Canadian. It's an animated feature, Rock and Rule. It is fully animated. It seems to be a bit much in a bit in the style of Ralph Bakshi animation, although it's not his company at all, and it's very much using a rock and roll music of about 3 or 4 years ago. Rock and Rule, an intergalactic rock and roll classic, if you like, in animation, and that kicks off the program at 5:45 on Wednesday the 23rd. That evening's program in Hollis Theatre 2 is The Man Who Fell to Earth and Britannia Hospital. And Britannia Hospital is not a film that I would have put in a science fiction program. Still, that's nitpicking. A lot of good movies, and as I say, if you haven't got hold of a program already, then you ought to do so. Other movies to come our way over the next 4 weeks. The first release movies, apart from Rock and Rule, which they're kicking off the program with and which does occur a number of times after, Light Years Away, a film last year from the United Kingdom, not a film I've read anything about, but it stars Trevor Howard, an actor I greatly respect. That should be interesting. There's an Australian movie in first release called Future Schlock, which evidently has been put together by the Valhalla people from Sydney and Melbourne. They've put up the money to make what is to be a middle-class wars of the 21st century. It's 1990 and strange things start happening in Melbourne, Australia. Future Schlock. Weird, perverted, crazy, hilarious. Possibly will take over from where Liquid Sky leaves off with audiences. And Liquid Sky, by the way, is being featured in this program from BFC. The Keep is another movie that's in first release. Looks to be something of a horror movie. And also there is Coonskin, Ralph Bakshi's film, I believe an early Bakshi film that hasn't seen release, one very much in the Fritz the Cat vein and taking Bakshi to the heights of extending animated cinema for the adults, which he became well noted for. Coonskin, described as being earthy and poignant in the program, and another movie I'll look forward to seeing. There are a lot of animated features, in fact, in this BFC program, and you ought to get a program to check out what they are. BFC has also kindly put together those films they call overseas SF. And by overseas, in fact, everything's overseas except, as far as I can see, one movie which is Australian. But by overseas, they mean non-English speaking production houses putting them together. There's El Topo, Allegro Non Troppo, which have been in the festival before. Beauty and the Beast, a very early production, a 1930s odd one, I think, which I've not seen before and which is the first time I think it's been here. The Never-Ending Story rates in BFC programming if you don't get a chance to see it in first release. And The Seventh Seal, which is a classic for cinema goers and one I've not seen as yet and I'll be looking forward to seeing. There are others. In fact, there are so many others here on the BFC program for this 6th of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Film Festivals that I must encourage you to go out and get hold of a program and check out for yourself what you want to go and see. As I say, the most expensive tickets are the triple-decker bills, and they are $6 for adults and $5 for the unwaged. Other tickets are as cheap as $3.50 for those programs in which there may only be a single feature, which are the 5:45 and occasionally the 11:45 p.m. showings at either of the theatres. Well, I'll leave you to find the program and check it out, but don't miss the beginning of the program, especially if you haven't seen Dragon Slayer. I'll be back with more news of movies when I come to look at the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies in a moment, but let's have a respite from the hustle and bustle of trying to find finance for movies. Here's a track off the Metropolis soundtrack, provided courtesy of CBS, and I really enjoyed this movie, and I've said it a number of times over the last month. If you've missed it, well, don't miss it when it goes into second release, wherever that might be. Here's a track from Metropolis, a sequence which is quite striking from the film. It's called The Legend of Babel. scouring the galaxies to bring science fiction and fantasy to Perth, is our sponsor, Space Merchants. New release and out-of-print books, film and TV tie-ins, magazines, comics and related merchandise await the adventurous at 1 Forest Street in Subiaco. 6UVS FM thanks our sponsor, Space Merchants.
This here is Ridley Walker doing a station eye deed for 6UVS FM, which it ain't really a eye deed, it's more like a ear deed because you're listening to it, which this is the Faster Than Light radio show. All best.
Well, I mean to say, fancy cutting off poor Ridley there in the middle of his tracks, but thank you very much, Ridley, a la Russell Hoban. 2 movies, and I would say neither of them share the quality of science fictional vision of that work of Russell Hoban's in Ridley Walker, but both of them have their part to play. One, I think, should come in for a similar slamming to that I gave Gremlins last week, simply because of the illogicity of the plot and the inane way sometimes in which the continuity is worked together, and the really stereotyped way in which the characters have to offer their roles. Now, in Gremlins, I was hassling about the change of direction of the plot, and that somewhat struck me as being surprising, but when I read during the week that the man who wrote the screenplay had previously worked on comic books, it did not surprise me, as often in comic books no rationale is given for complete changes in direction of the story. In fact, when you look at the Comics Journal, the reviewers of comics are often praising a comic that's capable of telling a story with a little bit of logic behind it. And that's saying something. When we come to look at both of the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies on offer around City at the moment, Conan the Barbarian, as in his second movie, Conan the Destroyer, suffers the fate of the Gremlins screenplay in that I feel there's a lot of silliness in this plot, a lot of silliness in the actual words that the characters have to offer, and often a lot of silliness simply because the characters don't have words to offer. I mean, strong silent types may all be well and good, but when they're supposed to be developing relationships and supposed to be tugging at the heartstrings of ladies and challenging the men, one needs a few words to go along with piercing looks and shrugs of facial muscles, etc. And in Conan the Destroyer, we don't get enough of that. In fact, that's a complaint that I brought against Conan, the first of the movies in this Conan series. By the way, he's signed up for 5, so there should be a few more yet. Anyway, Conan the Destroyer. Set in the same land, although Conan is still looking for his kingdom, and there's much made of that in this particular plot, that he's looking for his kingdom and he's looking for his rightful Queen Valeria to rule alongside him. There's the same shot that was used at the end of the first movie, Conan sitting on his throne, enthroned as king at the end of his quest, thinking pensively about the kingdom he's come to win. So maybe over the 5 movies we will eventually get Conan working towards his rightful queen and his rightful kingdom. That's the cycle that's been set up, and it's certainly a slow grind getting there. In this particular movie, co-stars for Arnold Schwarzenegger, Wilt Chamberlain specifically caught my eye. Anyone who's 6'9" or 10 or whatever he is, and looks like Wilt Chamberlain does, is massive opposition to Arnold Schwarzenegger's more stocky bulk, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's no small chap either. These two on screen together would make, I think, most armies run in the other direction. Nevertheless, Wilt Chamberlain, dressed all in black furs and hanging onto his own sword, is a very frightening picture. The only jarring note in the small crew of people that ride in this particular band, in this particular Conan adventure, is the lovely, the beautiful woman, Princess Jenna. Olivia d'Abo is really out of place in this movie. She's really like an English schoolgirl let loose in a barbarian's countryside, and she has to offer the most vapid phrases to her heroes, and really I found myself sitting there going, oh dear, couldn't they have chosen someone with a little more spunk to play the part of this lady? I know she's supposed to be the average Vestal Virgin and nicely chided and such like, riding off because only she in her purity can pick up the jewel which fits in the orifice which is allowing her to get the horn which has got to go back into the head of the statue, which is the plot of the movie. As you can see, it owes a lot to comic books, doesn't it? Nevertheless, she really doesn't fit into this movie. The other riders with Conan and Bombata, who Wilt Chamberlain plays, the other warrior, is Grace Jones, a Zula, who is a woman warrior. And so we have this lovely juxtaposition. Stupid English countryside girl and very strong, negroid, facial-featured warrior woman who's very aggressive and very angry. So we allow ourselves to have a few comic book trade-offs about the nature of femininity and what it is to get a man and how one does just that, all of which I found a little tiresome. It could have worked well, but it didn't for me as one viewer of the movie. The fourth and fifth riders in this band, or the fifth and sixth riders in this band, I'm not keeping count particularly well, are Akiro the Wizard, played by Mako, who appeared in the first of the Conan movies. He comes back here for a reprieve, and really I think he would have been best left in a cameo role. Opening and closing doors does get a little bit tiring even for him, I should imagine, to keep up his acting ability. And Malak, played by Tracy Walter, a male thief that accompanies Conan and is really in the script for light relief, but it's light relief in the Three Stooges vein, and once again it jarred a little for me. So Conan the Barbarian didn't win in terms of the actors chosen. Even though they look the part, they don't necessarily fit the plot particularly well, and they certainly don't deliver their lines particularly well. But the sets of this movie are a completely different story. There is a whole army of Italian plasterers and woodworkers who came out to make these sets, and they are very impressive indeed. I've said it before about Italian filmmaking, especially with respect to Hearts and Armour some time ago. They do make movies look fantastic. And Raffaella de Laurentiis, the daughter of the magnate of filmmaking of a science fiction and fantasy vein, Mr. de Laurentiis himself, who produced Dune, stayed on in Mexico after the Dune sets had been struck from the sound stages and put up the sets to Conan the Destroyer. She's done a great job of constructing the sets. I just wish they'd done a better job of constructing the plot. So a film that's very good to look at, some wonderful scenery, some great matte shots, some beautiful model building and some beautiful structures, but which was lacking in the acting department. Not so the second of the Arnold Schwarzenegger films on offer around town. It's for a more mature audience. In fact, it got an M rating in the United States and has the same out here. So it's 1 before R, which means it's a little bit gory. The Terminator is about an android who comes back through time from a machine generation of Los Angeles in the third decade of the 21st century. A decade coming under a lot of hammering, I might add, of late, because that's where Metropolis is set, and it's also where a number of other movies of late have been set. Some very different visions, though, of what that decade holds in store for us all. The Terminator comes back to try and change the course of history. His target is one Sarah, and it's she who needs to be rubbed out. Unfortunately, there are 3 Sarah Joneses, I think it is, in the phone book, and he rubs out the first 2 before he gets down to the star of the film, Linda Hamilton, who acts very frightened and very well for most of this movie and has some rather good dialogue to go with it. The people who put this movie together are straight out of New Worlds Enterprises, the Roger Corman picture-producing factory of the 1970s, and it's still going. They worked on Escape from New York and other features, Battle Beyond the Stars, and they've brought their talents here to this movie, The Terminator, and they do a very good job indeed. They start with a not half-bad script. It's a bit like The Last Starfighter, for science fiction readers, a story that's been around for a long time. The time paradox loop. What happens if I go back in time and wipe out my grandfather? Do I cease to exist? In this particular movie, the aim is to wipe out the mother of a man who becomes very important to the survival of humans in this third decade of the 21st century, when machines dominate the world. You see, what happened is, the battle computers we're building now to fight the super-nuclear war, they got talking to one another, and they decided that really they didn't need humans around, so they had a nuclear war, blowing up all the humans, but leaving themselves intact, because they, as machines, and intelligent ones at that, would be left to dominate the world. Unfortunately, they couldn't wipe out all the humans. There was one group that managed to survive and pull together other renegade humans, other surviving humans, and they're fighting a counter-offensive against the machine world. They're doing very well indeed. In fact, they've almost got the machine world beat when machines realise that the only way to stop the humans is to wipe out their leader's existence by wiping out his mother. And they send a super machine, an android, back through time. Mind you, it's no normal, our cyborg come android. It's a CSM 101, and that's a metallic chassis covered in biological flesh, so it looks like a man. And you guessed it, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger. And through an electric hailstorm of blinding lightning and such like, he falls from the sky, naked as the day he was born, and isn't that a sight to behold, in glistening, showered, sweat-ridden body, and oh dear, it had me worried in my theatre seat. He's a very strong-looking character, and he wastes no time in getting hold of clothes by ripping the arm off the average lad standing about when he lands and taking his clothing. And that's the start to what becomes a very violent, a very scary, and a very Sam Peckinpah-style movie. But it's worth looking at. If you can survive Alien, you can survive The Terminator, and it's a movie which I suggest, for all its hackneyed nature of its science-fictional plot, is one that's not half a bad to have a look at, especially if you're old enough to get into an M-rated movie. If you're not, you might care to read The Terminator and catch up with the movie at a later date. The novelisation of the screenplay is by Sean Hudson, a man not familiar to me for his novelisations, but he does a very good job of bringing the movie to life in the Star novelisation, which is around the newsstands at the moment. At $4.95, it's not a bad read, and one that I can commend to you. It very faithfully follows the movie, and it does, as I said, a reasonable job of recreating the feel. Well, that's me for this week. Next week, back with a look at SwanCon 10 and a special guest of honour here in the studio. I'll leave you to find out who that is when you tune in next week. Until then, bye for now. You've been listening to the Faster Than Light radio show, produced with muscles and a lot of sweat here in the Murdoch Studios for 6UVS FM.